creating the uninterrupted reading experience. Suggests that potentially I'm talking about books. Potentially I am, and I'm losing a clicker here. Books are where a lot of our app development projects have started. Talking with publishers, working with publishers, and publishing some of our own content. The publishing domain is incredibly rich for content. However, publishing isn't all about books. If I was talking to a publishing audience, and an audience completely full of publishers, they would all be up in arms because they all think they know what a book is. They all think they know what an app is. Potentially the two live together because we end up with a book that starts out as a project that potentially ends up as an app, but it has no resemblance whatsoever to that original content. I'll get to a project later on that started out as some words, some images. In the good old days, that would have been put together and made a magazine or a book. No, books, images are found in day-to-day. You're reading words of up to 140 characters on Twitter. Those of you on Twitter every day. That's a reading experience. But publishing is very much about things beyond books now. I'm getting some feedback here. Where am I feeding back from? Okay. In the same breath, we're talking about the movie business, and we're working with clients from the movie business that are now understanding that actually it's not all about that big screen or things that are just taken down to a slightly smaller screen. It's about every number of screens, but also about the content that goes into it. And this becomes about an experience, and a genuinely exciting experience because we're containing lots of content. And that movie may well have been based on a book. The written word works its way through all of that content because essentially you're talking about the script, you're talking about screenwriters, and you're talking about the end product, but the users, the customers, are all interested in how that got to the screen in the first place. It's either that run up to the film, watching the film, and then afterwards understanding what went into it and what's coming up for the sequel. How does it work as part of that story that revolves around the film itself? And then the record industry isn't all about music. The record industry is one of those industries that's gone through an enormous transformation. We're all familiar with the explosion of the iPod and the fact that we've gone from buying records to CDs, to moving on to MP3s and that digitization of the music business. Well, the business itself feels as if it's losing control, much as publishers feel as if they're losing control of that digital content. And the film industry knows the piracy and the way the content is treated and taken out there on YouTube. It's very much feeling as if it's out of their hands. So that extending of that story and the content that flows throughout, particularly for music, is giving some background to the bands, giving some interaction, and the way that the story flows throughout. Not just that single piece of music, because we used to have booklets, we used to have record sleeves, and we used to have some kind of brand extension to the band itself. And that takes us on to brands. And a brand shouldn't just be, particularly when we're talking about an app, shouldn't just be ticking a box to say, okay, we've got a presence. We all know everyone needs a presence as far as the internet is concerned. But if you think about the early days of the mad rush for everyone to have a website, it was all about, we must have a website. And the question was, why do you need a website? Because we just need to be there. And then the first ones that are out there were very much about just having a presence. And that's the place we find ourselves with apps. Lots of people come to us and say, we just need an app. And we say, why do you need an app? Because everyone else has got an app. Well, that in itself isn't enough of a reason. You have to have something to tell. You have to have a story to tell. Now, there are utilities, there are apps that are very functional, and there are always a purpose for that. But if you're talking about something that needs to be a more fully rounded product, a brand, for instance, your customers, the consumers, want to engage with your brand, and you want them to engage with your brand, and you want them to not just download something as a knee-jerk reaction to an advert, keep it for 5 seconds, and delete it off their device. You want them to keep that. You want them to have a reason to keep it and tell them the story. And I'll move on to the reason for talking about that, which is essentially they want access all areas. They want access to all the content. They want to feel as if they're not necessarily in control, but they're able to steer the ship. So if you're seeing an advert on TV, someone knows that they're interested in that car, they're interested in that box of cereal. But you've given them a good enough hook to pull them in to download the app. Once they've downloaded the app, What have you given them to keep them there? Is that a continuation of the story? Is that talking to them? Is that using all of the tools in your box? So we're talking about social integration, video, gaming, photo galleries, audio, data, GPS, all of these things that help to keep someone hooked, keep a consumer hooked. And that's very much about branding, but that works across films, across music, across TV, because they're all things that need to keep your audience. And that audience is across a variety of screens now. We're talking about the smartphone in your pocket. We're talking about the tablet, which is the shareable device. The smartphone is very much a personal experience because someone has personally decided to download your brand, download your book, download your film. The tablet experience is very much about sharing that content. You're going to experience it yourself in a different way that you do to a smartphone, but you're more than likely to then share it with someone, and that you become the brand ambassador effectively for that piece of content, but it has to be good enough for someone to want to tell them. And then we're moving on to the bigger screen. Smart TV is going to be very relevant in this next 12, 24 months. Smart TVs are out there, but they're not very smart. They're allowing us to watch YouTube, which is brilliant. There's some extra content there. They're basically allowing us to do things that we're already doing, but we're doing them on other screens. What smart TV will do when it becomes actually smart, when Google get the game sorted out, and more importantly, when Apple get the game sorted out, is they will allow access to content and visibility to content, because we've been talking about in our slightly bizarre pros and cons to telcos starting their own app stores yesterday. We were talking about visibility, and visibility is key because we have this infrastructure of an app store, if we're just talking about apps specifically, or iTunes if we want to include all the content. This is the tip of the iceberg, and unless you have a really good relationship with Apple, which we do, you're not going to be promoted. You're not going to be visible unless you promote and market yourself around and in various other communication channels, but that's not sustainable. What is sustainable is discoverability via, I'm watching a film, I'm watching a TV program, I'm even watching an advert, and that little red dot that used to appear in the corner of the screen is now an app icon. Or your electronic programming guide is the electronic programming guide, but with a series of icons. And it's that one tap, and it's not about then viewing or accessing that content on your screen. A lot of the focus is about saying, well, our content will work on the big screen. A lot of the content it just isn't necessary to work on the big screen. But what is necessary is it's discoverable, and it's then synced seamlessly behind the scenes. So you've downloaded it, you've just made that bookmark effectively, to then take it with you on your tablet, take it with you on your smartphone, and you've discovered it and you're using it later on. So your audience, who are they? Okay, we all love stats. Here are some made-up stats. I'm not here to give you all the facts and figures. There have been lots of people up on this stage giving you lots of really credible facts and figures. They've all been very, very useful. These are slightly exaggerated because they're talking about your audience rather than the specifics. So let's look at the biggest piece of the pie first of all, 62%. If my clicker will move on and reveal, there we go. This is your app connoisseur. The first thing that someone has just spent $700 on an iPad, the first thing they want to do is justify having spent $700 on an iPad. It's all very well explaining to my wife, I've got this amazing device. Look at all the things it can do. It's got multi-touch, it's got GPS, it's got accelerometer. That's not going to impress her because it's an empty device, even for $700. The first thing the app connoisseur wants to do is put very exciting content on there. Visually exciting, immersively exciting, something that actually does something that they can't do on any of their other devices. That's a big audience for something that we're talking about now. And this is about the entertainment value and also the quality and upping the game and making sure the quality of what you're doing is engaging. Whether this be something that you're producing that you're expecting your audience to buy and potentially part with up to $10 for, or you're just expecting to have that quality reflecting your product and your service. Okay, next up we've got the random element. Well, they can't help themselves, they must just download apps. This is great as far as the promotional level, because if you're app of the week, if you're promoted to some level, or if you're promoting yourselves in the right places, This is the audience that just clicks, downloads because they need apps, they love apps. But they still want to have that experience extended once they have it, because they're the very same audience that will download it, but they're very quick to delete it because they want to make some more space because they've downloaded so many apps. 11% is your existing audience. So this is who you're already engaged with, or you should be. So you have them, you have that audience in your pocket, but you need to deliver something to them that extends your brand. So I say if you're talking about something that's a free app, but it needs to reflect the quality. If you're Ferrari, if you're Rolex, if you're someone else that is delivering something that is an expensive quality product, or you're reflecting a quality product or service, then your audience is expecting that. And the last thing you want to do is alienate an existing audience. And then finally, we've got the engaged audience who have an interest in a variety of things, and it can be a passing interest. So for instance, it could be an interest in a genre of music or a type of film, and they will look for that broader area, but they will focus in on quality content. So you, again, want to be shouting about your content and saying how good it is, but it has to be that good in the first place. So what am I getting to here? I've talked about the uninterrupted reading experience, okay, because essentially it's an experience that potentially uses words in the form of a story, in the form of a way that weaves a narrative throughout your content. And there's a number of ways of talking about narrative, all of them visual, all of them interesting, but that narrative is essentially something that works across music, works across publishing, works across film and TV, and works across the brands that you're out there and you're representing and you're talking about. So how do we put that narrative into action? Well, you make that as visually exciting and as interesting and as deep as possible. So for instance, if we're talking about the Tim Burton experience, we're not talking about here's a big list of his films, here's his discography, here's his biography, here's his everything else. This is not about listing content. This is about taking the user on a journey. This is talking about Tim's earliest influences, right the way through his films, all the way through, and then giving some depth, because this is, if you were to look at this as a linear journey, this would all very much be a timeline. But that timeline, it has a beginning, because that's obviously from his earliest influences. You work your way through, and then there's depth throughout, because it talks about the films, and it talks about the influences on each and every film. But then you get to the other end, and that's not an end of the story, and that's the great thing about an app, and essentially digital content, because you get to the end of what appears to be that story, but then you begin to include updates and social media, and conversation begins to start. And this is where I'm talking about the narrative. The narrative is not entirely controlled by you, but it's instigated by you, and this is your opportunity to start conversation, and that conversation is very, very important. That use of social media is absolutely essential now, because we all understand about the web, and we understand that all of those millions and billions of users out there have an opportunity to interact with content. The great thing about an app is you start out your journey, and I'll get onto a little bit more depth about social media, and I'll even introduce my box a little bit later on. But let's talk about, so another example, we're talking about films, we're talking about Skyfall, we're talking about James Bond. This is great, of the moment, but the 50th anniversary is very much about all of that history of Bond. And again, it's not talking about a big list of films or a big list of characters. Of course, they're in there because they're all different sections, and you give the user the opportunity to get to those. But what you talk about is Ian Fleming, and you talk about his influence and the way he wrote the books, and the way that genuine narrative entwined its way all the way through, and how the character evolved. And you take a step back, potentially with Bond, you take it either way. You talk about as in character, and I'll show you an example of our Doctor Who app later on, where that was very much written in character, rather than talking about the behind the scenes, because we're talking to Whovians, and we're talking to people that live and breathe the subject. Well, that's very much the same approach to James Bond. The number of avid film goers out there that want to be James Bond, they're quite happy to immerse themselves in that kind of content. And then there's the music business. Now, the music business is, as I said, they are hungry for extending their content, extending their brands, and those brands are the artists themselves. We're working with a lot of music companies that are working with the legacy artists, so they have an incredible back catalogue, but they have an incredible backstory. And it's that backstory that everyone wants to know about what actually went on behind the scenes, what went on backstage, what led to the musical, well, what were the musical influences of each and every member of those bands. But then again, that story continues because most of these legacy artists are either being revived, in some cases when there's a deceased member of the band, they're not literally being revived, but they are being revived as far as influences are concerned, because you then have an opportunity to link to the influences of contemporary bands, and they get to start the conversation talking about how they were influenced by incredible artists of the last 20, 30, 40 years. But that story, again, is very social, and you have fans out there that desperately want to talk about their love of music and love of a genre of music and how they want to share it. And then again, all of this content is immediately downloadable. So that app becomes a conduit to all sorts of different downloadable content. And then you talk about something like, it's hotels, so something fairly local for you guys. If you're talking about, this is probably the best illustration of a brand, a leisure experience, whereas all the others are quite obviously his character-driven, or it's something that's more of a story to it. But then that doesn't mean that you don't weave narrative back into something that's a brand. You talk about the inspiration for the hotel chain. You talk about the design that goes into something building like an incredible hotel as this, and the influences. And you've got an opportunity there to talk about not just how to book a room. Of course, that's part of the process. And of course, that's the same with all of these. All of these are to sell products. If it's the paid-for product in the first place, they invariably lead on to additional paid-for products. So you're not just extending the story as far as the consumer's concerned, you're extending that as far as the brand's concerned. So something like a hotel, the end result is to have got someone excited enough to want to stay in your hotel. But that is a bigger story. And also, once you've kept someone engaged enough, you can continue to tell them that. So you can continue to tell them about forthcoming events. When's the next F1 race? When's it coming round? What are the races in between? But also, are there discounted packages for people to stay there when there's a race on? And about the general racing news and season in between. So you're extending it beyond your hotel, making it useful and appropriate to your audience. Okay, those words in motion. I'm going to introduce my box now, and it's going to look... The point of this is to say, I've talked quite a lot about tablets, and if I was to ask anyone how thin is the new iPad, then it would be pretty thin anyway. The point is about depth. Any content that you're putting on an iPad is not about a two-dimensional experience. Looking forward a couple of years, then we probably will be looking at 3D screens on the things anyway, but this is about the depth of content. We're talking about social integration, which is all the way around, and that's, as I said, pushing into something like this. And you're then generating content in here, and you're telling people a story that's, I say, it could be a linear timeline from one end to the other, but then at key stages, you're drilling down and offering people on their own terms as much information or as little information as you want to reveal about any of that content. What you're then doing is asking them, do they want to share it via Facebook, via Twitter, via any of the other social networks? Do you want them to then send that content back out again? So you're not asking for anyone's commitment, but through useful integration, you're saying, okay, via Facebook, I happen to have been in this section. It's a generated message that goes up on Facebook, or it's a tweet that says, this was fantastic, I took part in this. We produced the Guinness World Records app that essentially allows you to challenge Usain Bolt to the 100 meters, put your name on the leaderboard at the end, and tweet or post via Facebook your score. Then every May, the leader of that, at the top of that leaderboard, goes into the printed Guinness Book of Records as the iPad champion, the user that beat Usain Bolt at his own game. But that's a way of genuinely integrating things and integrating content rather than just saying, I'm on page 6, or I've just bought this. You're entertaining the user enough to make them want to tell people about the engaging experience they've had. That's the starring role of my box, but just to emphasize the depth of an iPad rather than just however many millimeters it is. Okay, a little bit about Brandwidth. I've done all, that's telling you about narrative. Everybody else, conferences are great, but lots of people stand on stage and immediately show you a video, stand back and say, wasn't this brilliant, this is what we've done. I'm just going to do the brief bit, isn't this brilliant, this is what we've done. Our first iPad app launched the same day as the iPad. 6 months before iPad launch, we were proposing to Guinness World Records that they should produce something for a digital tablet. The world out there was very hungry for a digital tablet. They thought it was fantastic. It was perfectly in line with their type of content. They produced the world's biggest selling reference book. And they had video content, lots of content that gave enormous depth, but how could that be produced? A tablet was perfect for that. But they said, that's brilliant. It's great to pitch something to someone for a device that doesn't yet exist. So they said, how can you prove that to us that there's any kind of hunger for it? So we produced a viral video that was essentially a piece of foam board, a green screened piece of content on it, that looked like someone using an iPad, put that up on YouTube, and it outpaced the X Factor in the first weekend, and it went ballistic. On 4 million views, we went back to the client, and they said, okay, we get it. We understand people are hungry for that content. We then produced another one, because they said, well, that's great. They're hungry for the I thing. Prove to us that they're hungry for our content on that device. So we produced another viral video that showed what could be the digital Guinness World Records. Again, went ballistic on YouTube. So we were able to go back and they said, okay, right, you've proved to us they want our content on that thing. Go ahead and produce something. So we worked away on little iPod Touches because we guessed that it would be like a big iPod Touch. Steve Jobs finally stood on stage in January, waved an iPad in front of the audience, and we got the developer kit. We were given 2 months to produce something. Up to the April launch, the final week before launch, on the Tuesday we presented the first working version of the app to the New York office of Guinness World Records. They approved it, luckily. Wednesday it was approved by Apple, pending the final beta. Thursday it was approved with the final beta. Friday it was on the App Store, and Saturday the iPad launched. This has been the story of the way we've worked since Brandwidth was born 11, 12 years ago. It's about thinking about the next thing. And any of these examples I've shown here about talking about narrative, it's about talking about the story. And part of that story is telling your consumers, your customers, your clients that they should be part of the next big thing, not of the thing that's happening right now. Because if we started building the thing right now, in 6 months' time, it would be the next big thing. So 8 innovative apps in 18 months. We don't produce lots of apps. Lots of people will come up here and say, we produce 70, 80, 100 apps. We don't do that. We produce we produce quality apps. They're not small budgets. They're not enormous budgets, but they are quality, well-rounded items. And by that very reason, they've all been promoted by Apple. We have a very strong relationship with Apple. And they now come to us and say, what are you doing next? 4 apps of the week. And #1 apps in games, music, and books categories. So they're well spread across lots of different categories here. Over 5 million promotional video views and over 500,000 downloads. 500,000 downloads compared to the millions that lots of people will quote. Remember, these are paid-for apps, the majority of which are. And so they are genuinely generating income. So this isn't about, again, we're not talking about 50 million downloads here because we're talking about apps up to $10, $12. Okay, very briefly, this is my only slide showing all the amazing things we've done, and then a couple of quick videos that I will talk over rather than stand back from. Guinness World Records, first app you'll find on iPad. Then Headspin Storybook, we brought the pop-up book to life with gaming and content involved. Top 100 Albums app, which was an incredible combination of lots of books about albums that all contained within an in-app purchase, a way to buy lots of different books, but all the way to experience lots of music and understand and read about that content as well. Fish, children's book app, again produced in-house by Brandwidth, one of our own titles. The Journey to the Exoplanets for Scientific American, I'll show you a very brief demo of that in a second. Doctor Who Encyclopedia for BBC Worldwide and Random House. Again, a stunning hit at Christmas, great one to be involved in, fantastic brand. One for Lexus down the bottom there, the launch of the new GS, worked with Lexus in Japan and spreading back across the world, whereas we're used to spreading over the other way across the world. It's nice for you guys to be there in the forefront and everything moving this way. And then the Numinous Place, which is a reading experience and our first move into fiction, and an opportunity working with Mark Staufer, a Hollywood screenwriter who came to us and said, I've written my first book, I want it to work as an app. I've approached the big 6 publishers. They've all kind of stared at me blankly because they don't really know what to do with it. You'll see more on that soon, but that will essentially be a great combination of reading and immersive interactive content without breaking the narrative. And finally, looking at portals, which, again, the thing that annoyed me yesterday about the toing and froing in the conversation about telcos' own app stores was that portals are an amazing way of doing this, because essentially you launch an app or you launch something online that then forms that funnel and that conduit to all of those other existing delivery mechanisms, because you have one place to promote your content, but lots of, if you're looking at iStores, lots of different ways with an infrastructure already embedded to push to your content. But it's a great way to raise that kind of profile. Now, okay, as long as sound levels are fine, I can still talk over this one. This is, very briefly, this is our journey to the Exoplanets, which was about the reading experience. We had 10,000 words, 80 fantastic images, and a way to incorporate interactive timelines, scrollable text that didn't rely on any pages. If we're creating a book like this, there's no longer a need to create pages. Involved kids, there was experiments for kids in here, but one of the great things to do here was that we were able to, through incredible illustrations, place the user on the planet's surface. We were able to use some incredible ways to access info on the amazing exoplanets that are out there. Here's the illustrations. I'm just going to work around and we should see a planet's surface in a second. Using the accelerometer and gyroscope, you're literally panning around as if you're on that planet's surface, and it's introducing things that you couldn't do in another medium. And then finally, we all like to spin things, but we wanted to spin things for a reason. This was about the planet builder. So you're spinning your planet, but you're also affecting the way that planet is built, from distance to size to makeup. And then at the bottom, on the 3rd level, it's telling you what's happening as you're doing that. So there are lots of apps that allow you to spin things. We know we like to spin things. But we wanted to work that on 2 different levels, because you spin it, you affect it, and then you understand what your effect on the spinning thing is. So there's an opportunity to learn there, and there's an opportunity to play. And that's very important with this content. It's tactile in as much as you're interacting with the content. And then the second example being Doctor Who. An amazing proposition. 2 years ago, I stood up in Frankfurt and presented a number of wouldn't these be amazing style concepts, one of which was Doctor Who, because it's such an amazing brand. But the point was, what if you could use the TARDIS as your main central navigation? What if you could work your way through the app completely randomly in the way the Doctor disappears through time and place, but stay in character, because the book that this was based on, the encyclopedia this was based on, was written as if everything is true. I'm sure it is. But the difference here was that we weren't breaking character, because we completely styled the app. We didn't use existing Apple API. We didn't use anything that was out there. We had the strict BBC brand guidelines to work by, but we created navigation content. The way that you're viewing your favourites here is underneath, literally under a viewer. You're scrolling your way through the Cybermen, and we're delivered content here that we're not generating complex 3D environments. We're delivered the content that exists already from the BBC. We're not using the standard Apple typewriter. We're using one taken from the inside of the TARDIS as one of the control panels. But then, of course, because it's a TV program, we're taking people out and we're showing them content from each of the episodes, which is then a separate opportunity to sell in via iTunes each of those episodes. I'll send you all the links afterwards for all these apps, of course. Now, they're 2 great examples of storytelling. Journey to the Exoplanets is very much about From end to end, it's about discovering, it's talking about via the timeline, talking about the earliest discovery of exoplanets. I mean, exoplanets are fascinating in as much as we all know about our own solar system. The exoplanets are out there, and they are much more interesting than the ones we already know about. Right the way through, from all the fun stuff, from build your planet, stand on the planet's surface, to the other end where you've got a chance to take away and work with experiments yourself to kind of generate things, understand about gravity. And then through to Doctor Who, which that narrative is all about staying in character. Right the way through the app, you don't break character, you talk about this. If the Doctor was using his own iPad with his own app on it, it would be referring to it as if it was all real. So that's the character we're keeping. My final click. Okay, now from my earliest pie chart there with my slightly made up stats, we were talking about retaining an existing audience and engaging a new one. This is very much about if you've got a quality product to offer, a quality service to offer, you do not want to alienate by your existing audience by creating something that does not live up to standards. And you very much want to engage a new one, because that's the user that wants to have the most exciting, the most creatively produced app that they possibly can on their iPad, and transfer to iPhone, and watch on their TV and take across all those platforms. We're talking about mobile here, it's a mobile show, but it's very much about syncing across all of those. And if the final click takes me, thank you very much.